Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Hartman. I am the music and technology assistant at St. Mary's. Some of y'all know me from 9 a.m. I am very, very pleased to be joined today by Father Rob Travis, our incoming rector. It's great to see you today, Father Rob. I hope you're doing well.
Very much so, Robin. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, and St. Mary's pleasure, of course. So we've got a whole bunch of questions, some from the parish at large, some from staff, and just kind of everyone just wants to get to know you a little bit better. And so that's kind of what we're setting out to do today is to understand, some of your background, who you are as a person, as a priest, and what things you're looking forward to as we start a whole new chapter in the life of St. Mary's. So I think we'll just kind of jump into some of the questions. So you were born in Waynesville in North Carolina. So what other areas and states and parts of the country and the world have you called home?
Well, first, I just want to say that I really appreciate this opportunity that we have on this technology to introduce myself. Before I get there, never been able to do this before. In other churches, it was show up the first day and hey, here I am. And I always had this challenge of figuring out how much to share about myself in those sermons, which is precious time for teaching God's word. So this is a great opportunity to just have a chat and let you get to know me a little bit. I was born in Waynesville, North Carolina. My dad was the rector of Grace Church in the Mountains in the 70s. And shortly, when I was little, before going to school, we moved to Attleboro, Massachusetts, which is right up here in New England, near where I am now, kind of in between Boston and Providence. For those of you who aren't familiar with the New England area, we lived there. What I would call during the baseball formative years until I was about 7 years old. So I'm a big Red Sox fan, always have been. Don't even remember liking another team. But we moved from there to Rochester, New York, where my dad was rector of Trinity Church in Greece on the west side of that city. And yeah, we stayed in Rochester from my being in second grade all the way through high school. Then I went to college in New York City at Columbia and enjoyed living in New York City, but kind of got sick of a lot of urban things really shortly after graduating. So in the year after I graduated, I moved out to Long Island, New York, and went to St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, which was in Port Washington, right by where I lived. And I lived in Port Washington for, let's see, 4 years, I guess. I'm going to step back a little bit too to say I've got the opportunity in high school to go to live in Germany as an exchange student. And so I feel at home in Staufen in Breisgau, which is near Freiburg. I was there during my junior year of high school, still have friends and consider my host family like my second family there. And during college, I got the chance to study abroad, both in Norway in the summer after my freshman year, and also in Germany in Berlin in my junior year of college. So as you can tell, I was really interested in international things. I thought I was headed towards being a diplomat and working for the State Department, and God had other things in mind. So when I was in Port Washington, I got called into being a volunteer youth minister, which is another story I can tell another time. But then from there, I met the woman that I married and went to Rhode Island for the first time back in 2003 for just a short time after we were married, as I was in process to go to seminary. So I went to seminary in Sewanee, Tennessee, and our first two children were born there. And that was a great experience, Middle Tennessee near Chattanooga. And we went from there to Orlando, Florida for my first parish after seminary, right in the center of Orlando neighborhood called College Park. And then from Orlando, after I served as assistant in a church there, and then as a hospital chaplain, we went back to Tennessee, to Knoxville, Tennessee, where we lived for 7 years. So that was Knoxville was where I went from to get to Rhode Island. I had a sabbatical in Knoxville where I went to Colorado for 4 months. So that was nice, but it isn't really a place I'd call home. Although my kids think of it that way because they were there for the whole school year,
Mm.
and they think of it as a place we moved, even though I was just there on sabbatical. Um, and we came up to Rhode Island in 2015, and I've been in two parishes in southern Rhode Island since then. So I've kind of been all over the East Coast and in Central Europe as well.
No kidding. Wow, that's a really unique and really interesting path. I'm sure you've got so many stories that we're all going to love hearing for many years to come. I'm looking forward to hearing more of them. Um, so born in North Carolina, as you've gone all over the world, all over the country. Now coming back to North Carolina, I know that one of the things that you're looking forward to is the food culture that we have here in North Carolina. What are some of the things you're looking forward to most about coming back down here?
Mm. Well, since you mentioned food, I love barbecue. I've been a barbecue aficionado. In fact, my wife kind of says I'm a foodie when it comes to barbecue.
Hmm.
I don't tend to comment on a lot of other things, but if I get a good barbecue place, I start going into, ooh, what's on the rub of this one? Oh, I taste a little cumin, or I taste a little cinnamon. What an interesting thing. I bet they smoked it with applewood, instead of a hickory. And I do love that. I love, all kinds of things that were related to barbecue. And so I'm excited about the barbecue culture in the Piedmont area of North Carolina because it's not a part that I'm super familiar with that way. East Tennessee had some great barbecue. Rhode Island less so, but there are some gems even in this state. So I'm excited about that, and all sorts of down home cooking is exciting about coming back to North Carolina. I'm a big lover of mountains and the sea, so it's interesting coming to be both right in the middle between the two. People kept talking that up
It's always
about
the
how
best part.
you can kind of go to the ocean or you can go to the mountains when you're taking your time off wherever you want to go, and that's a thrill. We've lived here in Rhode Island right by the beach for a while, but I miss the mountains. And when we lived in East Tennessee and we were right by the Smokies, I missed the sea. So it's kind of neat to be in the middle that way.
That's actually a perfect jumping off point because some folks have asked what outdoor activities. So now you've talked about sort of the sea and the mountains and sort of the natural landscape. Are there any things about like are you like an avid hiker or things like that that you're really looking forward to as well, or anything like that?
Definitely. I'm both an avid hiker and an avid swimmer. So, here by the ocean, one of the things I love to do is go swimming. We've been living 15-minute bike ride away from the beach, and I get up usually before sunrise to ride my bike over the beach and do a sunrise swim with an open water swimming group. Tomorrow's probably going to be my last one with them. We usually swim a couple miles, and that's great exercise, and I love it. And they've been saying, well, where are you going to go? And is there a place to swim? And I said, well, not where I can just ride my bike to the beach, but there's probably a place to swim. And they said, oh, there are lakes. There are definitely lakes you could swim in there. So I'm sure I'll find places to swim. But also I love hiking just for Indigenous Peoples Day. My my oldest son and I went hiking up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and just had a blast hiking up Mount Monadnock. And that was just a couple weekends ago. So looking forward to hiking and swimming primarily. I like to ride my bike. I love it that High Point has a nice long bike trail.
Hmm.
So, you'll probably see me out there on the bike path quite a bit.
Wonderful. God, that's a great selection of or cross section rather of different
Oh, and
things to experience.
sorry, I should mention I love fencing, but it's really hard to find a good fencing club. So I haven't done it in a few years, but I was a college fencer for Columbia, and I've taught people, coached fencing before. And if I have not found out yet if there is a fencing club in Greensboro or High Point or Winston-Salem.
Well,
So,
hopefully someone can point you in the right direction now that we know to be
yeah.
looking. So I know one of the other things that one of the other many skills and interests that you have is that you play the cello. So how did that start? How did music kind of come into your life? Are there other instruments that you play? Are we going to get the chance to hear you play for the parish? I just love to hear about the role that music has in your life, both from a personal interest and as a general interviewer, I guess.
Yeah, well, cello is important to me. I love, as you can imagine, playing the cello, deep notes. I'm a bass clef kind of person. When I was little, I was about, I'm from a musical family. My uncle, my dad's brother-in-law, was a tenor at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and dad played as a church organist before he became a priest. And so music was just always in our home. My dad even has a French double harpsichord in his house that he plays every day. So music is a big deal. And when you're in a musical family like that, one of the first questions after, do you want to ride a bike, or even before that, is what instrument do you want to play? And I just loved this book about this little Dalmatian who had a tuba player next door, and he just loved the sound of the tuba. And I don't know if any of you remember that children's book. I wish I knew what the title was, but it was big when I was like in preschool. So my parents asked me what you want to play, and I said, well, tuba, of course. That's my favorite book, and I love the tuba. And they said, well, Rob, you're 5 years old. Your mouth is not big enough to blow a tuba yet. Why don't you try the cello and, learn about it that way? It has nice deep notes like the tuba. And maybe when you're older, you can pick up tuba. So I started playing cello when I was 6 with Suzuki. My older sister had been doing Suzuki violin, and my dad had a kind of a dream that we would be a trio. Um, didn't really come to fruition. We have a Brahms trio that we work on together from time to time, but we never actually performed it for anybody. Um, and I just kept going with cello. In high school, I had my best friend was a guitarist, and really quite a good one. And he brought me to the guitar shop and said, you got to get a bass." So I tried playing electric bass. I still have that electric bass. I've done a little bit with it in the church band, um, but I haven't really taken the time to actually learn to be a good bassist. And I have played my cello for various things. I had one professional gig when I was in high school. I got to play with the Chuck Mangione comeback tour called "The Hat Is Back" when they toured upstate New York. And yeah, I still love to play just on my own, and I'm sure that there will be an opportunity for me to play at St. Mary's sometime. Yeah, so
Did you ever
definitely,
circle back and give the tuba a shot?
that is a lifelong dream.
Okay.
Still hoping to try the tuba. My middle child Simon plays the trumpet in the jazz band, and has been kind of convincing me, it wouldn't be too bad. I could teach you, the basics of a brass instrument, and you could probably pick up a tuba and try it. I think that would be fun to try sometime.
We'll have to find a way to work the tuba or the sousaphone into something that we do at the church. Okay. That's a rich, rich musical family history and personal history. That's tremendous. Okay, so transitioning a little bit into the role in ministry in church. So, what is your earliest memory of church?
Hard to say, because being
Hmm.
in a clergy family, church is about as ingrained in my life as
Sure.
everything is. It might be between two different things. One is either I remember when I was very little, probably just barely able to walk, maybe 2 years, well, not barely able to walk. Maybe I was a toddler, like 2 years old. And my dad's up at the altar. The church was really kind of wide open. There wasn't a lot of space as far as I can remember between the front pews where I was sitting and my dad. And I just remember running up to him while he's doing the Eucharist. And he tells me this story too, because he said, you just ran up to me to give me a hug. You didn't understand that it wasn't time. And I just kind of tucked you in right by my leg. And you just stood there hugging my leg the whole time while I did celebrate the Eucharist. So that's a really early one. Um, yeah. And probably similar to that was, with when around that same age. And my big sister, Nell, taught me to, because she used to bring communion to her stuffed animals. So she kind of taught me how, you give communion this way. You say the body of Christ, the bread of heaven. And my parents had some guests over at their house, and I got some of the crackers off the table and went to people in their party and just handed them to people. It's like the body of Christ, the body of Christ. I'll laugh. I was a toddler then too, I'm pretty sure.
It's good to get the practice in early. um, so okay, so you've talked about how you in your like early adult life you were going sort of on the angle of thinking you're gonna be a diplomat with your time in overseas in Germany and in Norway, and then something changed, and you probably, I'm guessing at that point, experienced your call to full time ministry. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like and what your reaction to it was in the moment, and how it's kind of, I guess, changed as you've looked back on it, that type of thing?
Sure. Yeah. Um, good phrasing to that question. I was kind of surprised because growing up in the church and with my dad as a priest, a lot of people would say to me, "Oh, you're going to follow in your father's footsteps someday, young man," and I'd just be like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I've got other things in mind." And my dad was encouraging me that way too. He said, "You don't need to be a clergy person. God has a call for you. It could be any number of things." And he was real supportive of me wanting to go into diplomacy. Um, but I stayed connected to the church. And as I said, when after college, I was going to the local Episcopal church, and got recruited by the rector to serve as youth minister on a volunteer capacity. Took a while for him to convince me to do that, because at the time I was, just out of college, and I felt like teenagers were kind of undesirable. I mean, I was like, these kids are rude
A
and
little too
they're
familiar.
they're cocky and they think they know it all, and I don't really want to work with them. But he must have seen something in me. He said, just give it a shot. Just have a meeting with the kids. I'll introduce you to them. See what you think, and try it for a few weeks. And if you don't like it, no problem. If you do, it could be a good ministry for you. So I agreed to do that, and I really fell pretty quickly in love with working with kids. I found them to be exactly what I thought, but also passionate about understanding what this church thing was about, loving truth, not wanting to have any BS. And as a person in my 20s, I really resonated with that sense of authenticity. And I thought, okay, this is great. But I was also, I was a volunteer minister, and I was discerning what to do with, my career. And one day, I had applied as a job to Lufthansa because it was a German corporation. I knew I wanted to travel. The diplomacy thing wasn't ripe yet in my life. And I thought they have this, corporate training program I could apply for. And it seemed exciting, get to move around the country, around the world for a few years, move into management. So I applied for it and I interviewed, and I felt like the interview, which was in German, went really well. So I'm walking to my work, which was in a marketing research company at that point, on in my usual walk when I would pray in the morning. And usually at that time, my prayer life was mostly me asking God for stuff. Oh God, help me get this job at Lufthansa. Oh God, help me, win this girl who I'm trying to meet, with that kind of stuff. Not a lot of listening that time. But I was walking along, and all of a sudden I heard in my mind this voice say, "Take care of my children." And I was like, what? That didn't sound like a memory. And it certainly wasn't, something I said. I was like, God, is that you? And God actually said, yep. And I'm like, well, why didn't you talk to me like this before? And he said, well, I have been trying, but you've not been listening. And I said, well, when you say take care of my children, do you mean you want me to stay here and work in this youth ministry? And he said, that's exactly what I mean. Um, and so I said, well, I don't know how that's possible. I said, what about the Lufthansa job? And he said, well, it's not going to pan out. So we had, for was the first time I ever had a back and forth with God. And I was thrilled by this. I was like, wow, this is great. I'm so excited. That evening I got a call from Lufthansa that said, thank you for your interview. We love you as a candidate, but this isn't the right time, and we encourage you to apply next year. So I was like, well, I kind of knew that was coming. And then the next day I was walking to work the same way, and I come across the rector, who normally is not walking to work at the same time when I'm walking to work. And he comes up to me, he says, Rob, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, yeah, sure. He tells his wife to go on ahead, and he just pulls me aside and he says, I want to know if you'd consider going full time in the youth ministry. And I was like, what? I didn't even know that was a thing or possible. And he said, well, we've received this bequest from this person who was faithful. I've seen what you've been doing with the youth ministry here, and I want to invest in your ministry for a couple years. And I was just thrilled. And I thought, well, this must exactly be what God was telling me about what was going to happen. So that was pretty exciting. And it gave me the opportunity to experience professional ministry, and led me down the path to seminary. And it's changed over time, of course. The way I see in the Psalms, the psalmist writes, God has spoken once, twice have I heard it, that power belongs to God. And I've definitely resonate with that verse because, I've heard that take care of my children, but now I've heard it in different ways multiple times over my ministry. So it started out with take care of the kids in that youth group, which I tried to do and did, I think. And then over time, it's been take care of the people in this hospital when I was a hospital chaplain. Take care of the people at this church where you're working as the leader of pastoral care. Take care of the children in of all ages in both of these churches where you're serving as their head pastor. And each time it changes, there's a new angle to that ministry. Like, what does it mean to take care of God's children in this stage of life? But that remains the core of the call that I have.
Wow, that is a powerful story. It's incredible. Yeah. Well, okay. So the you've got this wealth of different spiritual experiences and pastoral experiences as well. So what to kind of bring it to back to St. Mary's a little bit, what were the aspects of our parish that sort of encouraged you to contact the search committee? What was it that stood out about life at St. Mary's and sort of the parish profile as we presented it, I guess?
Well, as you can imagine, there are a lot of things that are similar between Episcopal churches around the country, and rarely do things really stand out. But there were a few things that really stood out to me about St. Mary's that that drew me to be excited from the beginning. One of those was the friendship table, which I know is a brand new thing for your congregation. But I was really impressed that, back in 2017, the congregation had this vision for how they could take the needs of the community and invest in them while simultaneously investing in a new way of understanding spiritual life for young adults. And I thought, this is exactly what our church needs to be doing, to think about dynamic ways, because all the Episcopal churches are lamenting about, oh, why don't we have people in their 20s in our church? How are we not connecting with Generation Z and millennials? And so to take that and to say we care deeply about the food issues in High Point, And we also know that there are young people out there who want to live in intentional Christian community, and we're going to invest money and time and human resources to make this intentional community happen. That was exciting to me. I thought this is the kind of place that I would love to serve, where they're already doing cutting edge things. I'm involved in a monastic community as a companion, and I recognize that that's one of those things, the monastic life, that is not for everybody in terms of a full life residence kind of thing, but it is the kind of thing that can change someone's life, and from a young age into becoming, a mature Christian of service. And so I'm really excited about the friendship table. And I know it got kind of um, put on hold or shifted because of the pandemic, much like everything else has in our church. But I still think it has real possibility to be a dynamic ministry for St. Mary's and for the whole High Point community. So that's one thing. The other thing that was right on the top of my list that was exciting was the Center for Spiritual Life. One of the big things that I've invested a lot of time and effort into here has been trying to promote centering prayer in my communities. It's something I feel like I've done a pretty good job at, and I'm excited that the centering prayer ministry that I have is going to continue after I leave. We've got some good leaders in there. I also feel that, especially in this time where everything is speeding up and people have less and less time to think, and we're so programmed with every constant streaming and constant news feeds, that we really need to relearn how to sit in silence. And centering prayer is a great accessible way to do that. And so I was excited that St. Mary's is committed to the Center for Spiritual Life, that teaching centering prayer is an important part of the community. And it made me want to, again, learn more about St. Mary's. And I guess the third thing is just really your long and rich musical heritage. We have such a great thing to offer in the Anglican tradition of music. That's something that sets us apart really from our brothers and sisters in Christianity and other denominations. And I love it that, that St. Mary's is doing that. I thought I would love to serve in a place where I could chant the Eucharist regularly, instead of it just being a Christmas and Easter kind of thing, and where we could do things together, like, chanting the Psalms and, exploring all sorts of the riches of our musical heritage. So those were kind of the three big standouts to me.
Great, and those are three things that I know everyone is excited about as well. So I think you'll find a wealth of energy and anticipation around what we can do to keep growing those areas of our ministry. So you've kind of touched on a little bit of your views on outreach and talking about how the friendship table spoke to you, and I think it's fair to say you have a pretty expansive view on outreach. Um, and that I think you said before that a parish should practice outreach locally and globally, both. It's not a this or that type of thing. Can you speak a little bit more about kind of your views on that, and if I'm representing them appropriately when I say that?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's simple to say it shouldn't be an either or thing. It comes right out of the book of Acts, when when Jesus is sending out his disciples to be the church. What we celebrate on the day of Pentecost, and what we celebrate as the foundation of our church. He says, "See, I'm sending you as my witnesses in Jerusalem, to Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." So he says, and in between each of those things. And Jerusalem is where they are in that moment. So it's like right here, right in your local community, be my witnesses. And then Judea and Samaria. So that to me it's so clear that that's the outlying areas, right? Judea, where we come from, but the region outside of where we are right now, and Samaria, our neighbors who are foreign to us and not our friends, but who happen to live nearby. So regional speaking, but also to those who are not our people, and to the ends of the earth. And that to the ends of the earth, there's that and. He doesn't say or, he doesn't say you're only going to serve here or there. And so to me, it's clear that every church, whether it's big or small, has to figure out ways that their mission as witnesses of Christ's love can be done in all of those areas. So um, I love that St. Mary's is deeply involved in the community of High Point. I love it that they've been doing things regionally as well, and in some ways internationally. And that's one of the things I want to increase is that sense of whole ministry. That when we do outreach, for one, the outreach has to be in witness to Jesus' love. It's not just social service. We're a Christian community, so it has to be about showing people hands, through our giving and through our teaching that Jesus loves them. And that it has to be in all of those places. So I'm excited about the possibilities that we can do together at St. Mary's with in all of those areas.
Absolutely. That story is such a perfect encapsulation of the ethos around that practice of outreach. Do you have other, I'm sure you have plenty of a short and a long list of favorite scripture moments, but do you have one that stands out above others, um, that I don't know, that kind of comes up again and again through life for you?
Mm. Yeah. Well, there's a few. The one that is probably the my longest standing favorite verse I keep coming back to is Micah 6:8, which is, he's saying, what do you want from me, Lord? And the Lord responds, well, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? That's the verse that I remember when I'm struggling with how much I want to do and how much sometimes things can feel overwhelming. I come back to that verse and say, okay, have I done justice? Have I loved mercy and loved tenderly? Is another translation of that. And am I walking humbly with God? And that gives me peace because I think every Christian should be able to say they're doing those things. Um, and then another one that comes up in a number of places in scripture is be still and know that I'm God. That one is it's a wisdom saying. It's something that in this time of being driven, we have to be reminded over and over again. It's when we stop the drive, and we stop thinking that we can do everything, and we can know that God is God, we're not, and we can rest in what God's doing. So be still and know that I'm God is, of course, also a big part of my centering prayer. Sometimes when I am not quiet enough in my mind to sit down, I'll just repeat that verse in my head as a way to slow down. I'll say, be still and know that I'm God. And then I'll say, be still and know that I am, which is, of course, also a name of God. And I'll say, be still and know. Be still, be. And then I'll go into the silence. And sometimes it takes that repetition of that simple verse to quiet myself and be still. So those are probably my two biggest ones.
Yeah, those are both very very grounding verses, I think, and that's I made that connection with centering prayer as soon as you said it. It makes perfect sense to find those moments to slow things down, like you say, in a life that is perpetually speeding up and providing more and more information. Um, okay, so in sort of, I guess, with centering prayer and this slowing down, um, this kind of it goes into this can be a form, I guess, of self care and a way to sort of practice, recentering ourselves spiritually, mentally, physically, and that kind of jumps off at a question of like what does is I'm assuming that's a part of self care for you, but what other forms does self care take for you, as a pastor who is immersed in some of the hardest parts of people's lives, um, who is often called in for times of sickness and loss. And how do you balance the weight of those situations? How do you take care of yourself in those situations, I guess?
Yeah, that's really important. I think it's something that all clergy are challenged to do in this day and age, especially. Well, obviously centering prayer, that's a daily practice for me that I need for self-care. And I strive to do it twice a day for 20 to 30 minutes each time. So that's a discipline that's critical. But there's also, as I mentioned before, exercise is really important to me, and finding a place to do regular exercise is essential for my mental and emotional health as well as my physical health. Um, so, up here, it's been getting up early in the morning and going swimming. That's been just such a crutch here. But in other places, it's been other kinds of exercise too. And the other thing is really balancing the time. You mentioned, when you're on call and you're there for people, especially if you're sitting up with people in the hospital, through the night. Um, it's really important to be careful with the time that follows, or the time, especially in that situation, the time that follows, because those emergencies, you don't know if they're coming up. So, for example, if I did that, if I was up with a family, in the hospital late at night, I'm not going to come into work in the morning. I'm going to take off the morning so I can rest and be recovered so that I can work in the afternoon. And it's one thing that I thought was great about the way that the Diocese of North Carolina phrases the letter of agreement with the clergy. They talk about having blocks of time that you're expected to work. And every day, if you think about it, has 3 blocks of time: morning and afternoon and evening. So if you know that you have busy stuff going on in the afternoon and the evening, well, you don't come in the morning. Or if you have to come in and do a morning, afternoon, evening, you don't come in the next day for those mornings, so that you can balance that time out. Because when we burn the candle at both ends, very quickly, we're not actually available for people, and we're not really good ministers. So that, just being good steward of the time is really important. And the other way that I keep that is with Sabbath time. And, up here, my Sabbath has been Mondays, and I've really striven to keep that Sabbath holy time for me, where it's just resting. It may be doing chores around the house, but I'm not going to read my email on that day. When calls come into my cell phone, I'm going to screen them to see if it's an emergency, but I'm not going to return a call to someone who just wants to, check the wording of something that I can wait the next day for. Because, as Jesus said, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's made for us to restore us. And when you work on Sundays, you need to have a day of rest that's not on Sunday. So those are some of the ways that I do self-care. And the other things are, trying to also take vacation time when it's allotted to me, so that I can be really on at work.
Those are all really, really good reminders, I think, to all of us that to take that time as well. It's good to hear that. It's something that I believe in very personally, as well as having that sort of work life balance, and that's so hard to have for the clergy when it's not a 9 to 5 type of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's hard for everybody these days.
yeah,
I feel like a lot of people who used to have 9 to 5 jobs where they could just, go into work and come home and be free from work, they're expected to carry their cell phone at home. They're expected to check their emails after work and things like that. And that has been, I think that's done more harm to our psychological and spiritual health than anything else, because it's forced people to have to make those boundaries themselves. And a lot of people aren't really good at making those boundaries. And so, I've ministered to a lot of people who would look back and say, wow, 20 years ago was the last time I had a vacation. And now I'm in the hospital,
right.
wish I'd taken that time. I think everybody, it's not just the clergy. A lot of people struggle with how to do that important self-care. And we need to promote that.
couldn't agree more. And that's a perfect transition to kind of talking. You mentioned how the last year and a half in quarantine has sort of reintroduced those new challenges about how we balance things, and our parish has definitely dealt with a whole lot of social disconnections that are kind of prevalent today because of quarantine and because of the coronavirus. So, what are your thoughts on kind of how, as we as a society are trying to kind of pull ourselves out of this situation, how we as a parish can do that for ourselves and for our community moving forward?
How to pull ourselves out, that's the big challenge that we're all in, right? In some ways, we thought we would be well beyond this by now, right? I mean, last last Easter, I remember us thinking, oh, well, we'll definitely be through this by the summer of 2020. And each time to come, it seemed like something else was up. Oh, well, we'll definitely be back together for Christmas. So, it's been way longer than we thought it would be, and it's still going on. It still affects people's lives, and it still affects what we can do as churches. And so we're not really through it yet. And how we can pull out of it, well, one thing, I think we have to acknowledge together the grief and the struggle that we have with it. I think that's important. I think as a community, we have to not allow the anxiety of will we get back to what we had to overwhelm us, but recognize that, hey, we've all been through a really traumatic situation, and it's going to take some time to heal. Just like it would be if we had gone through a war or through some other kind of, gross tragedy that became trauma, right? So we're all in a state of kind of having sort of PTSD, and the damage that's been done leads us to fear, and we have to stop the fear and say, look, it's going to be okay. We have a great God who is going to bring us to the next place together. And if we believe in what we've been doing, that it's life-giving, that it will continue to be life-giving. So that's the first thing. Just acknowledge where we are and where we've been, and not beat ourselves up or bottle it up, the way some people would do. We've seen when people go through a grief process, if they bottle up their emotions and try to deny it, try to live, oh, I just got to get back to the way I was living before. Well, the grief's going to come out somehow. It just does. And if you just let it out to begin with and live through the grief and don't bottle it up, it becomes easier to deal with. And that's the same way here. If we try to rush into it, the grief, the trauma, the PTSD, all of that's going to come back to bite us. But then it's that believing in what we've been doing. If we, believe that as a church, we have something to offer, we'll still have that to offer. And if we focus on what's important, what people have been saying throughout these last few months is we've had a time to shed the things that aren't so important. And so if there are things that we were doing that really rise to the level of this is really important, those are the things we apply ourselves to. And if there are things before that, we maybe enjoyed 30 years ago, but they kind of had worn themselves thin, well, maybe it's okay to let some of those things go and to focus on the things that have life right now. So I think that's what our challenge is going to be in this next few years, is focus on where life is and where we can do life-giving things together. And we'll find that. The big thing is, as soon as we can, come back together. And already we see people coming back together, but not to, I guess one of the challenges right now is to help people see that it's okay to come back together, because it's in community that we sense and discern the Spirit, and that we find what gives life. And it's in community that we do those things together.
That's yeah. That's a about as well as you can put it. I think it was such a deeply layered question. Okay, one more question that's about more of the challenging type of things, and then we can go to a little bit more of like a lighthearted sort of place. So, in the next 10 years or so, what do you think is a challenge that the church, and when I say church, I mean big C, the whole church, the whole Christendom, as a whole, is going to have to face and overcome? Maybe as it relates to St. Mary's, or just as it relates to the broader picture.
Hmm. Well, so when you say big C as a whole, I struggle with that a little bit because big C could mean the Episcopal Church, or it could mean all of the churches in the United States, or
Sure.
it could mean Christianity as a whole, which I think are widely different things. I think for the Episcopal Church, one of the biggest thing that we have to face in these 10 years is evangelism, that we have to be reaching out more than we ever were before. And it's funny to say this because when I was growing up, I think it was the presiding bishop declared the 1990s the decade of evangelism. Did you remember that? Did you know that? It was the decade of evangelism for the Episcopal Church. And we didn't do a great job with that. I remember that because I was on the Diocesan Youth Commission at the time, and we were trying to promote things for evangelism. But at that time, people were still saying, that's a bad word. We don't do evangelism in our church. That's what those evangelicals do.
Hmm.
Well, you know, we need to be doing evangelism, and not because the church is declining, but because we have something to offer. And it can't be only the evangelicals who are doing the evangelism. We have a really good thing in the Episcopal Church. And so the Episcopal Church rightly needs to focus on sharing the good news and going outside of our churches to do it. So that's like big news Episcopal Church wide. The reason I separated that out from the church as a whole worldwide is because the church as a whole is growing faster than it's ever grown before. And in a way, while we feel decline in the Episcopal Church in this country, we're being left behind by our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. One of the places that I've done mission work is in Madagascar, and I was just reading this year in at Easter time in the diocese where I served, one parish had 1,000 baptisms at Easter. One parish. It was like, imagine what that would be like, 1,000 baptisms. How do you even do that? It just seems so mind-boggling to us, but that's what's happening in the church in other parts of the world, and we can participate in that. So that's the other thing. We may be sort of declining as a church in terms of membership, but we still sit on the vast number of resources for in global Christianity. So one of the challenges I think at St. Mary's that we'll have that I'd like to promote is the way that we can invest those resources and see ourselves as part of the global family of Christianity and have an impact on those places where the church is growing by leaps and bounds. There were 2 priests doing those 1,000 baptisms in that parish. And I was thinking, how much more would it mean if we could fund another priest, to serve in a place where it's desperately needed? It's just an idea, but I'm just saying that global Christianity needs us, and we need global Christianity, because the other thing that happens is when we see and we're taking part in that fantastic move of the Spirit, we get inspired too, because we see that the same message that's being preached there is being preached in could be preached in our place, and people get excited about that, and they say, how can I get involved? So thinking outside of our church is, in terms of what are the next 10 years, is very important. And the other thing really is, I think, that we're faced with is the situation with climate change. I have to say that that's, to me, one of the biggest challenges. That if they said, well, where are you going to be in 10 years? Well, I would hope it's going to be at St. Mary's. And I hope, I think St. Mary's is a strong place because it's away from the coast, but there's going to be significant cultural and not just socioeconomic, but really, what's the term I'm thinking of? Societal change that's going to happen because of climate change reality that's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. And I can't say what that's going to look like, but I can tell you it's going to be a challenge. And we're going to have to face that as a Christian community. How do we serve when there are climate refugees from other parts of our country coming to settle in places that are high points, for example? How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to welcome them in? That's going to cause major shifts. How are we going to deal with that? And we, as a church, will be challenged by how to deal with that in the most Christian way possible.
Lots of important things to think about looking ahead, and I think that that was a good multispectral way of looking at it, both ways that impact things with the church and our lives as Christians, but also just our lives as members of a global community. So it's important to think about both of those. Okay, so that was the last of the sort of heavier questions. So we kind of put together some what I like to call this or that kind of rapid fire questions. And rapid fire just means it's presented as a binary choice. You don't have to ascribe to choosing one or the other, and you don't have to go into detail. We got plenty of them to go through, but just sort of to kind of go down the list of these. So first one I have is vacation or staycation.
Definitely vacation.
Vacation. I agree. I like that.
Uh, I mean, I don't have a choice. As a clergy person, if I do a staycation, I'm still working.
Fair point.
Can't escape my work until I'm out of my house.
Absolutely. All right, night or morning?
That's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
So much good happens in both. That's a well, when I'm feeling really healthy, morning. When I'm looking for, I don't know. I'd say when I'm not worried about how healthy I'll feel in the morning, then night.
Fair enough. All right. Art museum or history museum?
Another challenging one. My
Mm-hmm.
goodness, these are harder than all the other ones. Um,
I know
hmm,
it's not a simple answer for any of these. That's why I'm like, it's a
uh,
binary choice, but I mean, both is
my,
a very relevant answer.
my teacher in college, in the course I took after college, said the correct answer is always it depends.
Mm-hmm.
Is true in this case, especially for it would I would say history, but it depends on what the history thing is going to be. If it's an exhibit I want to see, then history. But in general, art, because I can always enjoy something in an art museum.
I like it. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. Attend a party or host a party?
Attend a party.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Sometimes that stress of hosting can sometimes weigh a
Yeah.
little.
I mean, I like to host. It's fun, but it's not as free and party like as when you're attending another party.
Absolutely. Lose sleep or skip a meal?
Definitely lose sleep. I hate skipping meals.
Mm-hmm. Sweating or shivering? Fancy way of saying hot or cold, but
Yeah, yeah. I'd much prefer to shiver than sweat.
mm-hmm.
You can always bundle up more.
That's always been my rationale too.
That's
There's only so much you can take off.
right.
Salad or sandwich?
Sandwich.
Sandwich. Cook or clean?
Cook.
Mm-hmm. Cat or dog or both slash another option entirely.
Mm. Well, my son's guinea pigs will want me to say guinea pigs.
Mm-hmm.
They are just the cutest ever. But I'd have to say dog in general. I'm allergic to cats. I used to love cats before I was allergic to them,
Does
and
kind of stack the deck against them.
uh,
Sporting event or concert?
can I have both?
Yeah, I would say both for sure.
My Simon plays in the band, and when I go to the football game and
It's
that
a
band
perfect
is
encapsulation of
happening,
both. Yeah.
I'm like, this is all about the band right now. So, in general, I'd say probably concert though.
Morning prayer or Compline?
Compline, definitely.
I agree with that. It's a perfect denouement. Game night or movie night?
Again, I want to have both, but we do a lot more movie nights at my house, but game night is so fun. One of the blessings of this little nor'easter that we had yesterday when we lost power is we had to get out the games. And my son and I played Nefertafel, which is a fun medieval game. And he kicked my butt. So that was fun. Hard to say. That's if I can choose.
That's definitely an it depends kind of situation for sure.
Yeah.
All right, the last one I have, and this one comes a little selfishly as a proud sci-fi geek. Do you have a preference between Star Wars or Star Trek?
You guys ask the hardest questions. Why
Both is
wouldn't you ask something
100%
like,
valid
Red
here.
Dwarf versus Star Trek? 'Cause that would be easy. But man, I love both of those. Okay, I'm gonna have to countenance this question in a little more subtle way. I would say if it's Star Wars, it's gotta be either the first episode or the original three, four, five, and six.
Hmm.
But I would say that series would balance against the early Star Trek. Like I would say I would take Star Wars over that. But the next generation, I would take over those early Star Wars ones, and that might get balanced out by some of the later Star Wars ones.
A very well
Especially,
nuanced argument.
yeah, the Mandalorian rocked my world. That was
Hmm.
like, oh,
Oh,
this
it's
is
a whole
okay.
new paradigm.
Yeah, man, that just got me.
All right. Well, Father Rob, it's been great talking to you. I think we've got some great insight into who you are and what we have to look forward to at St. Mary's. On behalf of everyone at St. Mary's, thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Robin. I really enjoyed the time with you. You did a great job with those questions and putting them in a way that felt like a conversation. So thanks a lot. I can't wait to see everybody at St. Mary's and get to know you all. Um, yeah.
All right. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Take care, Robin.
Take care.